Welcome to the GMS Magazine podcast and vidcast or broadcast. This is Future Packers speaking. This is a podcast all about board games and role playing games, the people who make them, and above all, the people who enjoy them. And the reason why Future Packer, aka me, is doing this is because we had a bit of an issue with the original recording, and the first few minutes, I'm afraid, didn't have the audio quality necessary for me to actually want to release it to you. It really sounded appalling. For some reason, I don't know why, things didn't go according to plan after 15 minutes when we started. So, this is why I am saying hello to you now and introducing you, Chris Diaz, my absolutely wonderful co host, and Noah Adleman, who gave us a fantastic interview about his current project, who's just about finished in Kickstarter, and that you should certainly take a look at. So please, please, please do. I'm really sorry about this. I am going to try for this to never happen again, hopefully, but I do hope you will enjoy the interview.
Bounty
So
hunter
yeah,
slash person on the planet, interacting with their own storyline and with all the stories that are going on uh, in the game on the planet.
were there any inspirations for the setting?
Well, when we started this game about 2.5 years ago, you know, we I love story games and uh, above and below, near and far, where there's a book and you read things based on what you're doing in the game. I always thought that was cool, kind of a choose your own adventure. But the theme is definitely, at the time Mandalorian was coming out, so bounty
Mm-hmm.
hunter-esque type of game. Uh, and when we got a review from Rado, he basically said if you want to feel like you're in the world of Mandalorian, this is the game for you. It definitely gives you that feel.
Yeah, from a cursory, I was just like, I know some people, not necessarily me, because I'm too old, may make things like, people do the same thing with my setting. Oh, is it like Shadowrun? I'm like, no, nothing like Shadowrun. But people make comparisons to the games like Borderlands,
Sure.
because you're dealing with kind of that type of alien space western
Western, exactly.
type of thing.
Space Western, yes.
My
But
brain,
open world, and sandbox are key terms because you can do a lot of different things in the game to get victory or uh, victory points in the game.
yeah.
So,
So yeah. I'm also harking back to the an old B movie called Oblivion back from the '90s, and that was a it started. The only person of note in the film was I think George Takei was in it,
huh.
and yeah, it's one of those banned New Moon Cinema films that was on an alien planet. Look it up, folks, and I'm sorry. Um, but Sandbox does harken also like there's aren't a lot of sandbox games. And for the people who don't know what a sandbox game is, can you explain what a sandbox is?
Sure, there's a lot of things you could do. Is the easy way. You don't have to do a specific thing to win the game. You can basically adjust your strategy and do a bunch of different actions in the game based on what's going on, and anything that changes during other people's turns may change your mind as to figuring out what you're going to do next. Might want to take advantage of something that just pops up next to you. Think of in the video game world, like you were saying, Borderlands or any of the game where you're just running around the desert, and then hey, there's a guy over here that says, "Hey, you want to make some money? I got someone stuck in a mine and I need your help." You could say no and just move on, or you could say yes, and now you're on this little trek. Same thing happens in the game where you're going around the planet, working on your own story that you want to progress, but also, hey, there's might be a bounty that's high value close to you now. All of a sudden, you may want to postpone that thing that you were doing, take advantage of that. So sandbox meaning there's a lot of things you can do. You don't have to do everything, but all of it will help you do a good job.
Now, for most people, if they're looking for games that are in that same genre, there aren't as many as people might think, because it's actually a relatively difficult genre to write for, or like a mechanic, not really genre, because you have to make the different avenues of acquiring points balanced.
Balance.
And the two best examples of sandbox games to my knowledge, and I actually can't even think of a third outside of yours now, is a game called Gia or Jaya. I'm sure we'll have a fight about how that's pronounced, which is a
I've
space.
heard Gaia too. So
Well, that is wrong.
I know.
There's no G in there. It's an
I
X.
know. I've heard both.
And
Maybe
which is,
Western Legends is maybe one.
and Western Legends would be the other one. I think Western Legends has grown in popularity, so people don't talk about Gia. Gia did come out first, and the idea that you have a big open sandbox, and you could basically most of the time go where you want and go you want. With Gia, it was bounty hunting, trade, piracy, exploration, all gave you points. I oddly enough don't have Western Legends, but I know it has a similar type of thing where there's an open field of doing anything you want in the old West Sea. Now the irony, of course, Forsaken is a bit of Western and a bit of space. How similar are those games to your, not mechanically, but about the, like, is there you said there's bounty hunting, which Gia doesn't really have. If a player crosses the authorities, you can get points if you kill that player, but there's no NPC bounties that you chase down. So Gia doesn't offer that. I actually don't know about Western Legends. So like, what are the avenues of acquiring points for the sake? Like, what makes it unique?
One thing you should know is that the designer of Western Legends is one of the designers of Forsaken. So this is his, what he would call like his 2.0, but in space, not just in space, but like it's a totally different game. But everything that Western Legends doesn't do for people, gameplay wise, this has everything in it. So bounties, yes. NPCs, yes. There's a bounty that roams around. You can hit him up, and as he grows, as he doesn't, no one has to capture him, or her. But if he doesn't get captured, his value goes up as a bounty. But also, if he gets too strong, he has enough power to leave the planet, and then something bad happens to everybody. So it's in everyone's best interest, at least capture the bounty. You can also attack other players if you want, if you come across them. It's not specifically a combative game against other players, but it can do it. And you could disrupt, just like in a sandbox, if you come across another bounty hunter, and you don't agree on things, you can do damage to each other. But it's not going to take you out of the game. There's also 3 factions, and this is another key to this game. There's 3 factions, and there's a main planet and 2 moons, okay? And the 3 factions are the leaders of those 3 different zones. They still do move across and around each other, but you can do jobs for them, which will then get you a reputation in that with that faction. And that may be good or bad. It's going to be good because if you gain reputation with a single faction, they're going to give you good gear, because helping them out. But also at the same time, you may run across randomly someone from the opposite faction, and the card will say, you have reputation with our faction? And if you do, they might help you. If you don't, they may fight you. So it's going to be a different experience based on what you've already done in the game earlier. So jobs for factions is another way to get points, as well as going through your own storyline. One of the main ways to do that. Every character has their own branching story. There's going to be 12 characters in the game, and every character has branching stories. So every time you play that specific character, it will also be different for you, even if you're playing the same play. And how they interact with the planet will change things up. So it's a cool way of making things different without making it like a campaign. It's not campaign. It'll be reset every time, but every game will be totally different.
And so sorry, go ahead.
Well, I have a question. The way that you're describing the game, what is the player interaction like? Because the way that you described it made me feel a little bit like it's very much a solitaire multiplayer where people do their own thing, but they don't necessarily have to interact with each other unless there is conflict. Is that accurate, or is there other ways for the players to interact with each other?
There is ways to interact. but it's also what the other players do on their turn will change your things that you might want to do.
Okay.
For instance, if you're on one of the moons and you come across one of those characters that says, "Hey, do you NPC that says, "Hey, do you want to help me with this job? Uh, I've lost my robot, and the robot is a rogue robot trying to wake up a whole bunch of other robots in dormant state in the moon. If you help him, then and succeed, you may have to shuffle in other cards into other planets and other uh, planet decks, event decks that may influence what another person happens or comes across on that planet now. If you decide not to, it may overrun the planet that it's on to begin with, and now that planet's more hard to maneuver around, which is where another player might need to go complete a job. The direct combat interaction between players is not required, but it is definitely you definitely need to watch around what everyone's doing and see how their events are happening because it may change your mind to go to that planet and it may now change a path that you want to do instead of trying to do that one thing because now that planet is overridden by weird, gross fungus or a bunch of robots that are out to get you kind of thing.
Okay.
I don't know, did that answer your question?
It does. It does very much so because I mean the thing I like about this is something that Chris and I were talking about for role playing games before you arrived. Is about how world building and role playing games tend to be very static. I like the idea of a game being shifting and changing a little bit, and the
Yes,
fact that the action of other players change the world, so you have to react to that, not necessarily to the players, but to the
right.
consequences of their actions. I that concept, I'm sold. I really love that.
Cool. Thank you.
I'm a huge fan of, like, I love Sandbox games. Just on a basic idea, my wife and I like games where we're not trying to actively mess with each other. We like games that have low interactions, and are games where are passively interactive, which is what you said. I'm not destroying Paco's job, but I've done something that has made his job a bit harder to accomplish inadvertently because to do my job I have to inadvertently impede his, and it's one of those situations. And like I said, I think that's a balance. It's get the careful balance. But the one thing I really that spoke to me is the narrative. But the one thing about not so much Western Legends, but with Gia, it's something that I always observed. I love the game, but there's no attempts with the game, including the two expansions, one small, very tiny expansion and the one larger expansion that they did, that ever tries to create anything that feels like a story or fluff or a structure. When you look at it, it's just a massive universe, and you're traveling around, modifying your vehicle, buying a new vehicle, and then eventually at some point someone goes, "Okay, I guess I won because I hit a threshold of points."
Right.
And then it's over. That's basically how it works. And the one thing I appreciate is the fact that, once again, in Gia, the only personality is whatever you metaphysically put into the setting. So
Right.
I'm kind of with the idea of taking the Western Legends idea, and I wasn't a huge fan of the Western theme,
Sure.
but moving it into a sci-fi theme, which I am very interested in, and on top of that, adding lore and fluff to that without it being a campaign game. I think
Exactly.
campaigns of games are they're not old, but it's just there's only so many campaign games you can actually own. We have like
Sure.
12.
You at least know you're going to get a full story with my game,
Yeah.
basically, because you don't have to go through 12 scenarios to get to the end of the whole overarching story.
Yeah, and
Not
you can play as
not
different
that that's
characters.
bad. Yeah, and each character has their own arc, and
Yeah.
there's arcs that are built in planets as well. But that was always I always liked story and fluff but like discovering stories within a game. But it always seemed like it was either going to be a campaign 10 session game that I have to play with the same people because then they wouldn't understand, or it didn't work, or was disjointed because you didn't get to the right things at the right time. My goal definitely was, as an overall concept, was to make us at least the majority of the table will have a full story based on how they play, uh, and everyone will be able to enjoy that,
I have another
even if it's not their own story.
I have another question regarding that. And I don't know if this is something that you have already thought about, but it just came to me, and I just want to get it out there.
Sure.
But the way that you're describing the game, it sounds like it would render itself very nicely to actually be able to play the characters one after the other in some sort of legacy mode in which whatever it is that you do to the game with character number one is going to interfere or influence the way the character number two story arc continues from character number one because the world has changed. Is that something that for the solo player out there you've considered doing to add some sort of campaign continuity with a legacy kind of outcome to make the game richer for the solo player?
No.
Okay.
But each story, our goal was to make each story unique and complete. So, as it definitely has a great solo mode, but every time you play a character, even in solo mode, you're going to be able to do different things in your story. So it should feel like one complete story every time you play that character. Now, that's an interesting point though, because a lot of people were more worried about having to play the same character and having the same story, which is a valid thing to think about. But the fact that you're interacting with the planet and how that changes everything, it definitely there's so many combinations of things. But we've also taken that a step further in creating another other story packs that you could replace the character story with as more of a general hunter story or a mage story or a different generic that you could plug into the character that you like, but will allow you to replay that character again with different stories if you've gone through it so many times that you've done all the paths and you think you want a different story, but keep using the same character. We have thought of that. So definitely, you're right. There's a lot of the time was into the story and building the world. So maybe once this comes out and everyone likes it, right? So then RPG is also another avenue to take that to that level and possibly adding on some sort of campaign or legacy type of aspect to it for sure. It's something that would fit nicely, but we haven't done it for this campaign.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough indeed. Chris.
My only, I don't know why it flips the image there. I was trying to put your
No,
name
it's good. No, it's
That looks
perfect.
pretty good.
On
Oh,
your end,
yeah,
it flips it on your end, but not it because it has to because of the camera.
Oh, so weird. Anyway, so talking about the design now, once again, self-plugging because that's what I do. When we were working on Naramata, one of the things that we discussed, by the time you got it, you had the rules had already been kind of solidified.
Mhm.
But when you approached it, you know, we had the original idea of doing one big tray, and then when we got to the final, you had made two smaller trays.
Sure.
But when we were doing the player groups, you had suggested you didn't want the player area exploding with all these cards. So you had suggested, once again, it was a genius having the cards go outward instead of downward, because I had the cards going downward from the player tray. You had them going upward from the player tray, which was the smart way to go.
Yeah.
And then you also inspired the game design back to me, because then I redesigned the cards so there were symbols on the tops of cards so you could slip them all behind without losing information.
For sure.
And we did something similar, but that's something where your design reflects back on the graphic design on my end. So when you were looking at Forsaken, how was there a similar circular nature, or did you have a visual idea and then the designer worked with that idea, or did you get presented with the rules and then you just built the game, or was there a circular nature where you wanted certain looks to
Mhm.
be incorporated? Like, how did that design, that balance between game design mechanics and game design
And
aesthetics, how did
engineering and
and engineering,
engineering,
how did that play
exactly.
into how did that play into each other?
It was a more circular, like you were saying earlier on, and Reckoners is another good example of how that happened because I was in early on with Reckoners, and that's why it seems so integrated into the
Yeah,
gameplay.
Reckoners is
Right,
like you can't even think of it, you
right.
can't even
It's
play it
just, it was
without
the
it.
same thing that we did with your game, right? Because those player boards that snap into the trays were totally different when they
Oh yeah,
started the
we
game,
completely
and
redesigned
they
the
were
player
just
space. Yeah,
square, right?
yeah,
And we were doing the same thing for Brothers Bond, right? So
yeah,
like they
exactly.
used to be square, and then I'm like, well, what if we do this and put the coins down here and all that?
Yeah,
So it was similar to how we worked together on Brothers Bond and how the since we started from scratch basically for this game, and
yeah.
so I was there at the beginning. They were there designing the game, and I'm like, what if we do this? What if we do this? How does this work? We're thinking about adding this mechanic. How would that work with the tray and manufacturing? It definitely was collaborative the whole
What,
time.
like I said, there was, oh god, I know you, I almost 100% you positive you worked with this, you did work with this game. It was an anime kind of Asian samurai game. It came out I think 2 or 3 years ago. I think that was you. I'm trying to.
I've done work on a lot of Asian samurai games. Gugong, was that it? Or
No,
was
no,
it
it was a much more kind of fighting. I know it's gonna bother the heck out of me now. It had a very, very, like, one thing about, because once again, it felt like the rules were heavily integrated into the way the engineering of the trays work. Like with Reckoners,
right?
you actually have situations where dice slide, and you actually have your
Hmm.
the hit points are based off of sliders and so forth.
Yep.
Now, looking at your design, you have this really, really inventive ovoid shape for character trays,
Hmm.
and then you have this tracker that kind of moves along and so forth. And going, not going into too much. There you go.
I do have an example of this.
Of course you would.
The 3D printed version of the tray, but the final tray will be thermoform, like
Yeah,
most game trays are. But this is has multi levels, right? You can see with
yeah,
card sliding. This will be your character, so every character will just basically put in your character piece, and that will have different values and holes and slots for that specific character. The health track will be different based on the character that you pick, and there's a lot of stuff going on here, like your weapon over here, and your resources will sit here. It's a 4-player game max. You're going to get 4 trays, but there's going to be 12 characters, so you'll be able to swap in and out the components of that tray.
without going too much into the rule, are there, like I said, I was mentioning the fact that, have you ever thought, and I don't know if you've incorporated in this game, designs where the game tray, like we say with Reckoners, the trays are quite literally interactive. There are sliders on it. I
Yes.
mean, ultimately, and I'm not. This is not you. I could have made Naramata without trays. It would suck, but I could make. It just visually we did do that design. Reckoners would be a much more complex design if you were going to do it without
Yes.
your, it would be a bit more clumsy.
You
Um,
would have cubes everywhere tracking multiple
exactly. Yeah,
tracks.
exactly. Are there similar types of engineering integration in this game where there are certain things that you have contributed to the way the game is played, which is entirely based off of the engineering of these trays? Like, is there an
Sure.
element of the game that's very unique that you can't, that
Uh,
if you took out the trays, the game would be more clumsy mechanically?
the player tray is one of them, but the most unique and what I started with was the idea was this dice tower, which is a tray and a landing zone. So it's a multi-tiered landing zone for a dice tower, which is attached to it. So basically, when you're rolling, you're getting value of the roll based on the tier that it lands on and the value of the dice. So you can see the different values on the tiers. As they
Wow.
go down, they get higher value. So the tray is engineered to have a nice even spread of the dice. So if you're rolling 12 dice, you're basically going against one of your fellow players. You count up your dice pool, one white, one blue, you dump them in, and based on what happens, you're going to get a value of the tier plus the dice roll will make crits happen. And the gear that you have will allow some cool things to happen. You can, if one of your opponent's dice gets down to the very high value lower area, you may force him to re-roll that high value die, and now it will be mostly towards the top because it has a harder time getting to the bottom, just with high value stuff is. You can also manipulate dice up or down different tiers after the roll based on gear cards. So this was like basically I want this cool dice tower idea that I thought of, and then Travis and Mike, the designers,
Found a way to make it work.
made this game around that idea, basically.
And this was a situation. This is maybe I heard correctly or misheard. Is there so you could like once you throw the dice in, and obviously I'm gonna have friends that are gonna try to find a religion to try to create a way of how they can roll to get their die to go as far as possible. Like I got to roll like a waterfall at a specific angle.
Sure.
And so the question you can adjust once the dice stops on a tier. Yeah. You have the capacity in some situations to alter its position.
Sure. But the thing is that to make things fair like that is when it's always like a 1v1, either battling with a single set of dice to try to get resources or something based on the value. There's also when you're either battling an NPC or some other thing that you're another player, you're building your dice pools together and then you're putting them all in at once as a default. So you're shaking up your dice, all the dice from you and me, and if he throws them in, you have the same chance of getting down to the bottom that he does if he really wants to chuck it down in there, right? Or not. Then you have cards that can manipulate the final value of that.
So yeah, because that was where the conversation where I was wondering, and this is not one of those situations where I had this idea and I go, is that like whether or not you threw like whether or not you could throw one die and then throw another die.
So either you're throwing both people's die or he's throwing both people's dice at the same time.
Yeah, because also like could that's what I was curious. Could I throw one die at a time and then hopefully, but the second die kicks the first die into a lower tier?
Exactly, and that's a lot of things we can play with though with that, right? You could have a card that says I get to throw one of my die first, and then the rest go in, because it could push it down further. There's also, if you really have friends that care about that, there's a little shelf up here at the top of the dice tower, and you could have it where people just build their dice pools up here, and then you push them in to that. So it's a kind of a equalizer of, instead of holding them up here and trying to get them all in the hole, right? So you can.
Because I'm going to be like throwing dice for 3 hours.
All right, I want everyone on top of the shelf, and we'll push them in, kind of thing,
Because there's also a situation where if it depends, like, is the lower tier better than the upper tier? Like, do you want to try to get it on a higher tier or a lower tier?
So it's meant to be random in most aspects, but the lower tiers are higher value. But there's damage and power on the tiers. Right. So basically, you've got damage and power. So if you get down to the bottom tier, one of your dice will give you 3 power, as opposed to the top tier, which is 1 power, which adds to who wins the battle. But you are also going to take damage for going this low, because it's how you exerted yourself basically to get this high value.
Yeah.
There's a cost because you're really swinging hard. You hit 3, but you take a damage at the same time because it's so.
Because I immediately started thinking, like, if they were reversed and two players were competing, one player's die roll could knock another die to a lower tier, or if they're competing, maybe my die can knock your die to a lower tier. These are just
I know we've definitely thought about that.
The ideas and the possibilities of this is just it's amazing, the types of ideas you can. like, and you sit
Just in the
down and
last 5 minutes thinking about it, you thought about a lot of ideas that we thought about, right? So
yeah.
it's fun to think about the cool things you could do. And I actually wanted, because I love dexterity games,
Mm.
I actually was thinking about having some sort of alternate rules where the dice tower is set a platform that people click the dice down and try to maneuver the dice in a certain way. We couldn't figure that out yet, but I'm still hoping.
Yeah, there's a oh god, I actually owned this game and I'm trying to remember. This was not a sandbox game. It is a game with planets and so forth, and it was a cooperative game. I'm trying to remind myself what the name of it was. It wasn't a very popular game, but its gimmick was that you would roll one die at a time, and if a die roll was low, you could try to alter that die roll by hitting it with one of the later dice. It was literally one of its selling.
Dexterity wise,
Yeah, you literally after you throw the die in,
hmm
and your next die in, if that die was low, maybe you could get that die to a higher value by literally hitting that die with your next die. And one of the dies you had was a blank die that you got to roll last to see about hitting one of your previously rolled dice to see if you could knock it to a higher value. I can't remember the name of the game. I only played it once. We owned it, and I can't remember what it was, but it was a game that's like, well, that's a cute gimmick. And I also remember a game that also has a dynamic dice tower. I think it was Edge of Darkness, which had a cube tray, a cube tower, but it
yes,
had 3 different channels. So you didn't know which channel it would land in, and so it didn't have the tiers. They just had 3 different end zones.
gotcha.
So this is a very
Okay.
unique approach, and this thing that's I'm sure if my wife sees it, that'll be the reason enough to try to back it. But she also told me I'm not allowed to back your game until I hit 100K on mine.
That's
But
fair, and I'll
I'm
try to
at
help. I'll try to help.
I'm at 93 too. I'm
Oh,
very close. So if I
you're
get to,
definitely gonna get that in the last 48, right?
you never know. I could definitely use a boost. But
The last
um,
48 though is always you're always good.
well, my last 2 campaigns have both raised about 20, 30K in the last 2 days. But I'm competing with some really great games out there.
Totally different, but yes.
Yes, I know.
And
So
if everyone likes it, maybe we can integrate this tower into other games. That's the idea. Or
exactly.
different thing. We do have a stretch goal or an unlock that we did where you can replace one of the tiles that has a hole in it, so you may catch a die in the
Oh, it
center.
stops the die
It stops the die from going
That's
down.
actually evil. Because at that point, I'm thinking this is going to be I've never heard of someone incorporating curling,
Yes,
the
exactly.
great Canadian sport of curling,
Yep.
into a board game. But I am so up for that. Are the player characters asymmetric?
Yes, for sure.
So
So
not just
every
story,
character
yeah.
has a legend loop, which is this loop around that you always go in the same direction. It's basically like as you advance during different things during the game, you'll move your tracker around and get things, but you continually go around and around getting the same things, which is different, and not only in the stuff you get, but the amount of space and how that happens. And then everyone has their own power as well, along with the cards that they start with. So yes, very asymmetrical.
Go ahead, Paco. I've talked too much.
Well, yeah, I wanted to know in terms of playtesting the game, how has the method been? Because playtesting a sandbox game, it's not the same beast as playtesting an Ameritrash or an Euro.
Mhm.
How did
Yeah.
you go about it? What was the process?
So I definitely know a good amount about it, but I wasn't the one doing it. But what I know is that playtesting specifically, was that we just like, we just basically we have an online tabletop simulator version that we were able to test with players. But we would introduce characters one at a time. That was one thing that we did. And every time we played, if there was something that character would focus on that one character as far as asking questions, seeing if the character itself was balanced internally. But then if they found some loophole or things that interact with each other, we were very careful at figuring out and taking notes. Um, so I don't know all the steps that we've done, but there's been a lot of weird things like that where we had to. We've done a lot of testing too. That's just one way to do it. Right?
What was the most valuable lesson that you learned from that testing process?
Basically, we would find people who could figure out based on their own loop and the game mechanics itself that they would help. That was the main thing that we had to test really was can this player figure out a trick to figure out to get a bunch of points, not correctly. So it was a lot more testing the loop and the players' cards with the mechanics than it was in between the characters, the interaction between them, if that makes sense. So it was a little easier in that respect because a lot of the interaction is a lot of story and how that changes the story of each gameplay. But the mechanics and the balancing was a little bit easier because we just basically had to balance the mechanics of the game with that character's special ability instead of will this special ability be able to attack this special ability in a weird way.
Okay. How long did that playtesting last?
We're still play testing, but
okay.
we started the game 2.5 years ago, so we've been working
plenty of time, really.
And we've had at least a year and a half of one full-time person working on it.
Okay.
Plus me, plus Travis, plus marketing.
Tell me a little bit in the case about going a little bit into the physical product and the campaign. How do you go about making this game? Because one thing is to work for an external company, making your own on something different is working for yourself and have this as your baby. What's been different for you as a professional working on this compared to working for another company?
So I've done a lot of projects and I've been a part of a lot of projects. And just ask Chris how integrated I was in the process of his production of his game. Right? I do the same thing for all the publishers that I work with on the Trayz side. I've worked with, 24 production companies and 3 or 4 dozen publishers, right, Chris? So just being a part of that, yeah. So being a part of the production company, and I've also visited China right before the pandemic and some of the factories there. So I'm pretty well versed as to what you need to do to get the game to the production company and what they need, what they ask for, how to make sure they get it right, right? Especially with Trayz, but just there's no way around you not also having to figure out is the cardboard correct? Is it the right thickness? Is it what they expect it to be? Because it interacts with the Trayz so much. And I basically trained a bunch of production companies on the things that we need to do to make sure the Trayz and the cardboard and the cards all work together and fit correctly instead of just being separate pieces in a box. So it's been a lot of training over the last 10 years of doing all this that has helped me get to this point where I feel comfortable doing the whole process, or at least working on the whole process, imparting the knowledge that I've gathered just by doing a whole bunch of crazy things with a bunch of crazy publishers that want to do a bunch of fun things with games. I'm always wanting to do something cool with a game. I'm not just making storage or components. That isn't really what I do. It's how can we integrate this into the game and makes it either easier to set up and tear down, enhances the table presence or how it works on the table, setup time. That's the real value.
Yeah, because we see with something like Tidal Blade, which is a game I do have. It's very like like that is a hell of a piece. The box is massive, so there's so much. Like I can imagine like that there are certain projects that are easier than others. Like Parks is beautiful with the 2 branches, which are the Trayz that come out, and then you have something like a Tidal Blade, which is like this. This must have been just a complete clusterfuck when you're like, here's the game. You're like, oh my god. Was it your idea? Like Tidal Blade, like Tidal Blades, how much an influence, like were you with the person that's like, okay guys, you got were they the ones that said this is the box size? Or did you go the box size has to be like, because Tidal Blades has one of the weirdest, largest boxes out there.
For sure. Yeah, it's long, right? This one
It's
here.
very long. Yeah, you
Yeah.
can see it's the longest box across there. Like,
Yeah.
are you given like with my title just like standard box size? Okay, we know what to work with. But
Sometimes I like to do that, right? Like, or sometimes I work within a box size that someone tells me they have to be for some reason. Kallax shelves like these back here are one of the ones that most people want
Mhm.
to be able to fit inside all the stuff in this area here, which is 13 inches square by
yeah,
15 inches deep. Um, some games can't do that, like the ones above that. So, but most of the time I am in charge of telling people the box size that they need to have the trays to work with the components they have. Because trays
yeah,
do add air, right? They add space. And with Tidal Blade specifically, one of the interesting things with that was that it's long. This is the deluxe, but the one tray on the one side, if you're familiar,
mhm,
the deluxe stuff is all on
yeah,
one side.
yeah,
So if you cut the box into square, make it a square, that stuff is the stuff that isn't in the deluxe version.
right.
So it was easier to make the trays fit in that, and we could use the same trays on that side, and then just
Oh,
extend the box and put the deluxe stuff next to it. So
oh, that's
that's the
smart.
solution that we came up with. For that specific game. Yeah, but a lot of these games up here, I still try to do into the Kallax size, but as you can tell, not everything can fit it. And
Yeah,
my box is the same. But the thing with Forsaken box, as you can see, this is just a prototype box. It will get smaller and more compact and change in dimension, but just like everyone else, I have to wait until the game is complete in order for me to make final trade from the box trade, box size. Because if I do work on a trade new thing and then we add another 10 cards or change punch board or whatever, then there's no point of having done that work. But once our game is locked in, I'll be able to then start working on the normal game trays that I do to fit things into a box for shipping and production.
yeah. I remember us having a similar. It wasn't an issue, but it was trying to, like this is my first time when I was doing Naramata. My first time dealing with a Chinese game company. I'd done with book companies, but they're a bit easier. A book's a book's a book, so forth.
Yeah.
It's a bit easier to work with. But when we were working on Naramata, like when we first got our first prototype, the box wasn't deep enough. We were about a quarter of an inch, so the top of the box was sticking out above. And then when we were designing, we had to figure out how to get the trays to fit. And I actually had to do a reboxing video to show people how to box these trays
Yeah.
properly, because if you don't put them in correctly, they stick up. And
Yep.
so it's interesting. And then the funny thing is, and this is one thing where that miscommunication is entirely on me. They actually made a modification. I'm not sure if you know this, but they actually made a modification. You can't really see it. You can see here, but this is the cork day tracker.
Oh, right. The cork. Yes.
You designed it to fit vertically, and it actually doesn't. And
Right.
so China modified it so it went in horizontally. But that's one of those situations
Yep.
where I've learned to go, okay, I have to make sure that their numbers and your numbers are the same, so there isn't a
Exactly.
miscommunication.
Well, that cork, when I designed the tray, was not the size it ended up being for whatever
Yeah,
reason.
yeah, it ended up being
And
significantly larger,
yeah,
which I don't mind. But it was good the fact that now, as you said, China's learning. These Chinese companies are going, yes, we know what we need to do, and
exactly.
they're
And there's only a
like,
few that I trust to make changes like that. That I've done dozens of projects with already, like Long Pack, Panda Games,
who's
Eastar.
doing Forsaken? Who's printing Forsaken?
We're still in the works. We're still figuring that out. But as,
Still
like I said,
figuring.
I've worked with so many. They all want to help, so it's kind
Yeah,
of
yeah. Naramata was Magic Craft, and I have to. I do like. It was the only unfortunate thing was that we did a redesign of the trays that they didn't get in time, so we ended up having to use the previous design. And your
right.
second design, your revision was actually better, but one of those situations where,
It's
well, it's like,
that's one of the things that training a production company does, right?
yeah,
And Magic Craft was one that I haven't worked with uh, either that much or that was, I don't know if that was the first time or not, but teaching them don't make the final molds until we've gotten a sample, and then they make the final molds because they don't know.
exactly.
And
No,
then
I
they're like, if
enter.
you want to
Yeah,
change,
yeah.
then we have to change the mold.
Yeah, and I chose them because my game was mechanically similar to Tokaido, and they were the guys who printed Tokaido, so they all know, and they were also the cheapest. But that's
Sure,
the
that's good
side
too.
point. But do you ever? And this is gonna be a very weird nitpick. Do you ever get
We only
people?
have 6
Well,
minutes left,
let
by
me.
the way, right?
Yeah, I was going to say yes. We have 5 minutes left before Google kicks us out. So
Right.
We could do a second interview
Okay.
next week or something after the campaign ends, and we can
Well,
talk about that.
week after, yes, because next week I'm going to be at Spiel. Well, let's do it. You want to do it
Or the
yourselves.
after spiel anytime.
Okay,
Oh
that
yeah,
would be great.
I'd be at Spiel.
No, I'll just be at spiel.
It was a stupid comment. In fact, do you ever get people complaining that that your trays never accommodate for card sleeves?
Oh, what are you talking about? Like literally every time. Like, what do you mean? Does anybody? It's like one of the first comments on any of Kickstarters I'm part of.
Whose sleeves? Because people, you did Stars of Icarios, which is a good friend of mine, Jonathan Thwaites, right? People were like, "Why can't we? There's no space for sleeving cards." And I was like, "There's 800 cards. Who's sleeving 800 cards?"
Any sane person would do. Oh,
And that's the thing. A lot of times people do. The only time where I don't accommodate for sleeves is when the publisher says don't accommodate for sleeves, because I know that I'll get blamed no matter what because I'm doing the trades, right? So, but there are a few games where like I have 800 cards, and because you have to basically double the space that you need for those cards for the sleeves. So the box will be twice as big in an 800 card game. So either they said don't worry about sleeves, I'll take the flack as a publisher. But either way, I'll still get blamed for not accommodating for sleeves. Like these game trays don't accommodate for sleeves, and like, I'm sorry, guys. I mean, I try my hardest.
I knew I was touching a nerve with that one.
Don't worry, Forsaken will accommodate for sleeves. So don't worry, there's a good amount of cards, but we're gonna make sure.
well, thank you. I appreciate that. And if a publisher tells you that, just say, look, you just want to piss Paco off, don't you? Just that's why they do it. I'm convinced that they do it. So for when I do one of my unboxing videos, I just get upset. But
because you like to sleeve.
I do like sleeving cards. Yeah,
Right,
but
so
in fairness, I don't get upset with you.
Just think about it. Step in my shoes just for a second. There's a lot of extra space that you have to ship for air if you have a lot of cards, which is one thing. But also think about the card itself and the slot that it goes into, right? Now I have to make that same slot, I've done it different ways, to fit sleeves or not sleeves. So by having it be sleeves accommodation, it actually lowers the tight fit and the coolness and the perfect fit
It
for
jiggles
people
a
who
lot
don't
more.
sleeve.
Yeah.
People who
Yeah.
don't sleeve. So I have to basically make the game tray bigger for people who sleeve, which is fine. But now people who don't want to sleeve have a subpar tray because now they got a lot of air. You're
And
like,
why?
who cares about non-sleevers?
Exactly. Why should you worry about monsters? I mean, it doesn't.
So the thing that gets me hilariously is the fact that they have made sleeves that fit regular full-size poker cards relatively perfectly, but micro cards, the standardized micro card that unfortunately was established mostly by Fantasy Flight, is smaller significantly than the standard sleeve that's made for that. So if you're trying to accommodate your tray for the smaller cards, the spot for the sleeves would be about 15 to 20% bigger. It's significantly larger. Those people would know, like, I want to sleeve my cards. You never want to sleeve. You never want to sleeve small cards because the sleeves
And
are
of
way
course,
too
you're
large.
gonna. I'm guessing, Paco, you're also gonna want me to have to accommodate for ultra thick sleeves and thin sleeves and maybe double sleeves. Maybe you're a double sleeve person to make sure that.
No, look, I am a sleever. I am not a pedant. I just want to make sure that my cards outlive me. That's all I want. That's all I want. I
wish I could do both, and that's the best option. Like if I have a game, I'll end in 1 minute. But
yeah. So come on, give us the pitch. Give us the elevator pitch before we go. Why should people back your game now?
Oh, definitely you should just back the game because it's so unique. It's really cool. Got a lot of trays. You love trays and you love sleeves. Get the game right now. Oh god, there's like 30 seconds left. This cool tray. This dice tower is really unique and fun, and it's a space western, and it's awesome. Yeah. Only have 2 days
It's
left.
amazing looking. It
only have
looks
2 days left.
fantastic. Yeah,
You'll get a whole bunch of stuff if you back now.
Yes, you have both daily, social, and regular monetary stretch goals. So there's so much, Anyway,
Yeah,
thanks a
check it
lot,
out. Put the
Noah.
link in the thing or whatever.
We shall indeed.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
And there we go. That was the interview, and Google didn't allow us for a lot more time. Unfortunately, we could have been talking for a lot longer, couldn't we?
Yes, but I think it's good that we definitely keep ourselves budgeted, because you and I will go off the cuff and talk for 2 hours.
You and I mean, like us?
No, exactly.
Please, no.
But yes, the campaign looks fantastic.
It does, actually.
And I know from my own perspective that I brought up the card sleeving thing because I knew it was going to hit a nerve, because it is the number one thing. Whenever anybody works for Game Trayz, there's always going to be someone going, why don't they accommodate for sleeving? And it's one of those situations where it's like, if you accommodate for sleeving, the box is too big, and then it doesn't properly accommodate the cards without sleeves, because you either win or you lose. You can never win.
And I mean, I'm sorry, but I can imagine, I can think of ways to make sure that the cards can fit without the sleeves, making the hole big enough for the sleeves to go in once they sleeve it. You just put a little bit of foam around the deck, and then you can take a little bit of foam out when you have your cards done.
Yeah,
I know it's more expensive to do. I understand.
Yeah, my Neuromatic game, by amazing coincidence, actually has room, so you can sleeve the tourist cards, because the space is almost twice as big. So obviously I could add more cards, but it was that the issue, and I'm right about this, by the way, like showing off this card here. So this is one of the micro cards. Right. This is the standard size. This was established by Fantasy Flight, so this is basically the small size card. If you go to a store and get sleeves for them, the sleeves, I wish I had them here, are massive. They are significantly larger than these cards, and that's because that's why sleeving small cards is a bit of a nightmare. I can see people sleeving larger cards, but sleeving smaller cards would be a nightmare.
True. Okay, well, I want to talk about Essen.
Let's talk about Essen.
A little bit.
Maybe an Essen. It's next. I thought Essen wasn't. Oh God, I can't believe it. I was just going to say this. I thought Essen was in October.
Okay.
God, I lost all track of time.
I can tell, and thank goodness I don't need to do editing for these videos, because otherwise this could be very difficult to get out. Now, Aslan begins next Wednesday with the press day. That's when they let media people go in, and they have something really cool, which is that they allow publishers to be in a room that's dedicated just for the press. So it's amazing. You can go. They have little tables, and they can showcase their games, and the press can go in a kind of like a conga way all around the place, looking at all the games before the show begins. So
that's so smart.
It is very, very good. I really love it, because it allows me to do two things. Firstly, to say hi to the people that I'm going to interview over the following days.
Without 1,000 people trying to cram in.
Oh, no, there will be 1,000 people cramming in. Trust me. A lot of media people going, go to Essen. So, but they have restricted how many media people can go this year because of COVID restrictions. And because I get the feeling that some people were actually abusing the press passes.
Right.
So this year, only 2 people are allowed per media outlet.
So it's not, you can't bring you and your friends and all that stuff.
Exactly. You know, I know people who are 4 hosts of the podcast, and they used to get 4 press passes. And I was a bit like, no, you can get 2 of them. Sorry, mate, but otherwise, you can get people with creating podcasts just for the sake of getting free rides to Essen, which it's kind of, come on, it costs just a few euros to get in for the whole 4 days. So let's get real about this. These people need to make a living, and they do an amazing job considering how small a team they are. It's incredible. So no, that is the wrong thing to do. But they do. Who's
going with you then? Because you get 2 passes.
Yeah, Martin's coming with me. I have a cameraman. Yeah.
Oh, that's so smart.
So my husband will come to do all the camera work while I will be talking to people. And then Martin does the editing because he loves doing video editing. And thus far, I am going to be interviewing in the region of 20 Asian companies, because I want to reboot the way that I'm doing things. And I know that most people don't do this, but I like discovering unknown things. I have zero interest in super mainstream games. Zero. I don't care about the Wingspans or the Gloomhavens of this world because everyone knows about them already. Everybody talks about them already. I don't want to say or talk about what everybody else does. So I have always enjoyed Asian games because I kid you not, Asian games have the most original thinking, mechanics, themes in the world. I fell in love with them the first time I laid eyes on Sheppy.
Sheppy?
Yeah, it's a solitaire card game. It's more a puzzle than a card game, where it takes place in a post-apocalyptic world where the only things that have survived are sheep. And in order to guarantee the future of sheep, you need to get to 1,000 sheep. If you get to 1,000 sheep before X conditions are met, then you win the game. But otherwise, you don't win the game and the sheep become extinct.
Right.
I saw the game, I thought, I kid you not, that's the fucking weirdest thing ever. How can you think about that? But then, of course, I learned today that there's a Polish game about queuing to get food and general things. So it's a bit like,
okay. There's a company. Do you talk about Asian games? The company, whenever I think about games that are being published from that region, from people living in whatever it be China or Japan or whatever. There's a company called Emperor S4.
Yep, I am interviewing them on Saturday at 11 a.m.
So envious. Emperor S4, they have a kind of they've defined the small box, not terribly. It's kind of a small box Euros. They're really impressive. They've run Kickstarters for very small games, but they have Burano, Realm of Sand is a game I have. Anamakojo, I think they have 48 titles in their list, and they love making these very small box games.
But Burano is not a small box game though.
No, Burano is a bit bigger. That's actually a game I actually wish I had because I've been to Burano. I'd love to have that game.
I have the game, and it's a very heavy game.
Yeah. But let's see, Herbalism. But there's a bunch of games that have their title. A lot of them are small box. They're about yay big. They're not tiny epic box size, but they're still about sometimes half the size or what have you. And they're very, very popular games. My wife and I enjoy them a lot. There's about a dozen titles that Emperor S4 have in their small box variety. And they're very, very good games. Well, and these are all Chinese exports that they're exporting outside of China.
They're going to have they're going to sell their current releases, and they're going to have the existing games at a 50% discount at their booth.
Nice.
Yeah, so I can imagine I'm going to be spending a lot of money. But yeah, I think today and yesterday I was taking a look at Twitter as I was working, and I saw Suzanne Sheldon, who is absolutely wonderful, and I adore her, saying how she was a bit because she cannot come to Essen. And the problem is that most of the games that she's saying that are going to be released at Essen are games that are never, ever going to get to US shores because of postage or imports or what have you, which is a bit like, damn.
Yeah, so, you basically need a third-party company to import it. There's a bunch of games that I have. One of my all-time favorite games of all time, which is Kepler 3042, is actually an Italian game that got imported by Renegade. But I managed to get the original Italian version, which is, in my opinion, a far superior game. than the Renegade import. But yeah, but it happens very seldomly. Happens very seldomly.
Correct. So it's I tweeted today that it would be great to have some sort of initiative, either in Boardgame Geek or whatever, which is something I really don't have time to organize. Otherwise, I would, where people could say, I am in Ottawa and I would like to get this game from Spiel. So if anybody from Ottawa comes to Spiel, or from Canada comes to Spiel, and they have the space to get that game, they can also buy for you, go to Canada and ship it to you so you can pay them for the game or what have you. To have that sort of initiative, I think it would be great because, I don't think I've realized how lucky I am that I can get to Spiel. Because amazing as Gen Con is, I don't think it still has the gravitas, board game wise, that Spiel does.
I think the word I like using is Essen to me feels romantic. It's a bit more. It's kind of the word I like using. It's a bit more. I guess it's a dreamlike. There's a level of romanticism with it because it's like, oh, we're going to Indianapolis. Like I could see going to Essen to visit. There's a lot more visual flair. Like the idea, like I've seen photos from Essen, and I'm like that. Like there are beautifully creative tables, booths. And they're just it just seems like it's one of those situations where you feel like you're entering a dream world because it's such a fantastic just a spectacle. It's like going to Disneyland. It feels like that's what I mean by romanticism. It feels like a Disneyland. You go to Gen Con, and I've seen photos of Gen Con, and I've been to other gaming conventions and so forth, and a lot of them kind of look the same. But Essen just feels a bit. It kind of goes to 11. There's something a little bit extra put in the presentation.
There's one thing I have to say. I mean, I think that it's a matter of you being in the other continent, because for me, going to Gen Con, that is the kind of the dreamy thing. And I look at Gen Con's photographs, and I cannot help but thinking, damn, I wanted to meet that person, and I am never going to be able to get that role-playing game. I'm never going to be able to see that book ever. So there is that. But having said that, I have to say, and I reckon that this is to do with the fact that the main difference between Gen Con and Essen and Spiel is that Spiel is for professionals. That is where people go to do business, and not just sales, but licensing, where they sign contracts for new games, where they can do pitches, whereas Gen Con is more to play games. You go there to play games, and it so happens that you can also buy and spend as much money as you want buying things that people are selling. But it's more a convention than Spiel. Spiel is a trade show.
I was just gonna say that. I was just about to finish that thought. Is just like, I know exactly what you're getting at. It's a Gen Con is a fan convention, and Nations is a trade show, which means there's a bit more. I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, so I've actually noticed for myself. I want to visit more trade shows because I'm getting more and more annoyed at, and this is probably a topic for another discussion, the clientele that are now patronizing the fan conventions. It's really getting different to the point that I am making more money going to trade shows selling my product than I am going to fan conventions. And that can be very frustrating. We do have one convention nearby that's not to the level of Essen or Gen Con, but it is probably the biggest one I could attend. And that is Shucks, which is Shut Up and Sit Down's big convention. Shut Up and Sit Down have one convention, and even though the makers of the show are English and they make their videos in England, the Shucks is actually in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. And I've been tempted. My issue is, once again, it comes down to cost. I would have to rent a vehicle, drive all the way to Vancouver, and then I would have to sell out 200 games in order to make that profitable,
which is difficult to do at a con.
It can be difficult, especially when you're in an event that can be overwhelmed by a lot of other big companies. So I'm handling mostly local conventions this time, and maybe I'll hit up it for another event.
I wonder, there is something that I saw the first time I went to Spiel that I found absolutely fascinating and wonderful. And it no longer exists, I believe, but there was something called Arctic Union. And Arctic Union was a combination of a bunch of Finnish publishers and designers So what they did is that instead of going separately their own ways, what they did was to join forces and say, okay, if I get a 1,000 euro booth at Spiel, I am going to get, you know, a toilet cubicle size thing. It's going to be next to nothing. But if 20 of us get together and 20 of us have 20,000, then we can get a big booth that we can share, get more visibility, and basically do a lot better. And they did that for a number of years, and it worked very well. I know a number of companies that went solo later on because they did so well. They became so well known, like Dragon Dawn Productions, that it made it worth it. And I wonder if that's something that could be organized somehow in your neck of the woods.
Yeah, like I said, for me, like my future when it comes to me and my wife, we've been talking about this at length. The fact that we are going to no longer attend fan conventions or what is called comic cons, although comic cons are no longer really considered it's hardly a comic con, but a lot of people still call them comic cons. But comic cons and fan cons, we're going to stop. We may still attend them, but we're not going to run vendor booths there. And the reason is really kind of depressing because we're seeing this, I'm going to be very, very inflammatory by saying this, a much more selfish clientele.
Yeah.
A lot of the people who are attending fan conventions, there's a lot more and more that are coming as cosplayers or going in costume, and people who go in cosplay don't bring their wallets, and they're not there to spend money. That's the first reason. So yeah, a lot of people who are attending, they're bringing their kids, they're going in costume, and the last thing on their mind is to spend money and to support small businessmen. The second issue is that these fan conventions are being overwhelmed by third-party cheap import resellers selling cheap imitation knockoffs that the convention organizers have no desire to squash. And it's happening both in the general business sections and in Artist Alley. You're seeing a bunch of guys just doing cheap resells of other people's artwork and claiming it as their own. And a lot of these fan conventions organizers are not. In fact, I've been hired by 2 different conventions to run their Artist Alleys. And and a lot of the people who submit are shocked when I say, yeah, I don't want you at this convention. Like, I go to all these conventions. I go, yeah, but you're selling copyrighted artwork. I do not allow that in my Artist Alleys. Artist Alleys are for original artists selling original products. We do not support copyrighted artwork. And that's a shock because most of them don't get turned around. So when at the conventions I run a pretty tight ship. And as a result, I get a lot of really good high name talent because they appreciate that I'm very strict with who I let in the Artist Alley. I don't let crap. But the point is, so many conventions just want money. They'll take money from everyone. So they'll, so you'll see people like this, like vendors that are just selling Lego. There's walls and walls of Lego miniatures, and none of them are officially Lego. They're just cheap knockoffs. They're selling those wobbly head pop miniatures, right? And it's hard if you're a small businessman to compete with there. So it gets very, very difficult. So my wife and I decided that we're probably not going to visit these conventions anymore. But I just visited a small little trade show. Like it was in a roller dome. It was so small. It had 35 vendors, most of them local vendors doing toques, baking, and stuff like that. I made more money off of that convention on 2 days than I made at the last big fan convention I went to. One of them had maybe 500 people. The one I did yesterday probably had 500 people tops. The fan convention, I did one in Kelowna, which has a population of 150,000 people. They had about 5,000 people attend. I made maybe $400. I made $800 at this convention for a local vendor. So trade shows, I'm starting to think more hitting up trade shows, which is oddly enough, I'm going to another fan convention in a town called Penticton at the end of October. And I'm not expecting it to be a good convention, despite the fact that my board game Naramata is literally set in Penticton. Like the Naramata region is in Penticton. So I'm literally saying this game is named after the very place I'm in.
You might be surprised.
Yet, I'm not expecting it to sell well because it's a fan convention. But I'm attending a big trade show. The biggest trade show in my town happens a few weeks later. I am expecting. I'm actually hoping to completely sell out of my Naramata game at that event because people come and they've got deep wallets. They walk out with grocery bags full of stuff. So, and because it's in Christmas, everyone's buying, everyone's shopping for Christmas. So there is this thing. And so there's a part of me that says, I wish I could attend Essen as a business person because I know proportionally, if you had 100,000 people attend Essen and 100,000 people attend Gen Con, I know that's not accurate, but percentage-wise,
it's not too different. I think last year they had about 75,000 people at Spiel, and that was in COVID, full on COVID times.
But from a percentage-wise, more people are attending Essen, attending to buy or interested in buying games than at Gen Con. From my perspective now, and this is arbitrary, the biggest convention in Canada is Calgary Con. It will get 100,000 people attending their event. It's the biggest convention one of the biggest conventions in North America, actually. And they don't care. They'll take anybody because they're one of the biggest events in the country is called the Calgary Stampede. And they have a venue built specifically for that event because it's the biggest event, one of the biggest events in North America. The convention's at that location. And so their guest stars, they've had guests that no other convention gets. They've had the entire cast of Lord of the Rings. They've had a reunion of Back to the Future. They have some of the most insane guest lineup there. But I would say maybe 15, 20% of the people who attend that will walk away with a purchase. Almost everyone there is there to get signatures from or to dress up in cosplay. And my hometown convention, which is I get the table virtually for free. I would say 70 to 80% of the people who attend that convention are there in cosplay and they don't bring their wallets. And it's getting very. I did a video on my channel a couple of years ago when I ranted saying fan conventions are going to have issues, not because of attendance, because they're not going to get any vendors. And eventually, the only people that are going to attend their convention are third-party, knockoff resellers. They're all going to be selling the same 5 things: pops and stuffies that are all Chinese knockoffs. And it's unfortunate that that's the future where these fan conventions are going. That now for us, for people who are writers who make big games, we now have to hunt down and find the trade shows because that's where the money is now. But and the issue with trade shows is that 90% of them are crammed near the end of the year for Christmas.
Well,
there are 12 trade shows in my town, and I can only attend 3 or 4 of them because some of them are literally on the same day as one another.
Yeah, and I can see that, and I can also see, and this is something that usually is a problem, but I reckon that for something like Spiel is a good thing. The fact that you can get so many companies from so many different parts of the world that you can, as in. Not just you, but anybody who is a publisher can pitch their games to other languages very quickly. Suddenly you're going to find that you can pitch your game to 20 different languages because licensing is a big deal, especially for role-playing games. It's a very nice lifeline. So from that point of view,
there are publishers looking for the big Euro game that they want to buy and import.
Correct. They're more open to pitches and more open to talk to people about ideas and what do you bring here. So anybody coming with a prototype, I can assure you at Spiel, if you do a little bit of planning and preparation, you will have a more than sufficient number of game publishers to pitch the game to than if you go to Comic Cons or what have you. So I'm really excited. It's I haven't been to Essen in 5 years. In 2017 was the last time I was able to afford to go. So I'm looking forward to it because I'm also going to see some friends that I don't get the chance to see unless I go to Spiel. So this is going to be a pretty exciting and emotional time for me. I'm looking forward to it.
So what you're saying is that when my wife and I take our bucket list cross-European trip, that we should go in October and then stop at Essen.
Yeah.
Okay. So definitely. when we come see you, we'll come in October.
Or you can come at the end of September when it's still very nice and then go to Essen in October.
There you go. Like I said, I told Nicole that like, oddly enough, one of the best vacations I ever took in my life was when I went to Edinburgh, the last week of November, first week of December, which would be insane because it's Scotland. It'd be raining all the time, and yeah, it never rained. I went. That being said, it was always moist. It was always wet. Like the ground was always wet, but I was never rained on, which I thought was very unusual. Like, and it was cold, but it was never. I would wear a jacket, and that's it. So I wasn't wearing shorts, but I wore what I usually wear. I'm a Canadian. I'm used to wearing
I
pants
was
all
going
the
to say,
time.
it's not as if you're not used to cold.
Yeah, but the best part though of visiting Scotland in November is that the countryside
It's
is
incredible.
empty. It's empty and it's beautiful. My girlfriend at the time, Savannah, we rented a Honda Jazz, which is like a Honda Fit with less horsepower, which is amazing. And we drove to the Isle of Skye.
Oh, nice.
This is the best. So when we drove in Isle of Skye, we stayed at an Airbnb, and we were the only people staying at that Airbnb. And then on the next morning, we circumvented the entire island, visiting every castle and town until we got to Portree, which is the only town of significant size. We passed one car. When we went to places, we were the only ones there. We went to the Craigmullen. We went to some of the most iconic geographical features, and we were entirely alone. We went to castles and castle tours. One castle's like pay to enter, but no one was manning the booth, so we just walked in and wandered around this castle for like 2 hours and just left because there was nobody manning it, because nobody wants to go on tour. And we went to Portree and there was no traffic. We went home, there was no traffic. And I'm like, this is how you do it. And people were like, wasn't it cold? I went, I'm Canadian, I'm used to it. And people were like, didn't it rain? I went, it rained more the last time I was in Edinburgh, which was in June. It rained constantly. It didn't rain. It was cold, but it didn't rain. But it was just fascinating. So for me, like, we want to go to Vegas, but we're going to go to Vegas in November of 2023 outside of their tourist area when it's not 115 degrees. So I got to convince her that maybe in 2024, depending, or maybe 2023 early, that we'll go to Europe outside of the summer season when it's not so crazy and things may be easier to access.
Well, I look forward to welcoming you here at that time. But for now, I am looking forward to saying goodbye to you because we've been at it for an hour and a half between interview and everything. So, and it's already 11:45 at night. And as you can tell, my eyes are going a bit like, so.
So I guess our next recording time is going to be probably the 11th of October.
Yes, that is exactly correcto.
And I expect a full report. I will sit back and listen and I'll let you gush and show photos.
Oh, yes, you will definitely have it. But until the next time, listeners, viewers, thank you if you've reached all the way to here to this point. Thank you very much indeed for being there. It is really, truly, genuinely appreciated. Please get in touch. I am at GMS Magazine in Twitter and Facebook, and you can get hold of me absolutely anytime you want. And you can write to us podcast@gmsmagazine.com.
And I am Chris from Deus Ex Machina. You find me at Deus Ex Machina on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. My Kickstarter for Amethyst ends on September 30th. I think this Thursday at 9 o'clock.
Yes. So, and I'm going to try to have this done tomorrow. Hopefully, we'll see. So anyway, thank you very much indeed, humans, for being there. Much appreciated, and talk to you very soon.
There you go. Bye-bye.